This is the Founder's Catalyst. Hello there, and welcome into the Founder's Catalyst with Lee Povey and Steve Meller. You will have heard that in the introduction, so we can confirm that that is who is here, and we are excited to be talking with you today, specifically about the ego. And let's just again remind ourselves what this show is all about. We're trying to position leaders, we're trying to position founders to show up in the most effective form of themselves. And we are getting into the self in this episode, and we will likely build off of that concept as well in the following episode as well. So we got to talking before we pressed record, Lee, about this notion of ego. And a funny insight for our listeners is that the moment we came up with this concept, we both ran to our respective dictionary source and definition source and wanted to both get a better understanding of really what the word means at its essence and its origin before we start to navigate that. And I would love for you to share what you share with me, and then we can use that as a way to really set the table for where we're going with this episode.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like many terms, we talk about things, yet we're not entirely clear exactly what the term means, and that we're saying the same thing. So when you say ego, does it mean the same as when I say ego, and when a client says ego, or we say ego to a client? So I always think it's important to do that exercise we did, is let's define what we're talking about. There seems to be a couple of definitions. So the one that I like is your ego is your conscious mind, the part of your identity that you consider yourself. And then I think there's a secondary part to that, and this is the psychoanalysis part of it, the part of your mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for reality testing and the sense of personal identity. So the identity part is obviously the same. And then there's this difference between, are you conscious of it or unconscious of your ego? And I think that's something I really want us to explore today. My experience is a lot of people are unconscious of their ego, and therefore their ego drives decisions and choices that they're not fully conscious of, and therefore not as in control of as we would like them to be as leaders, and they would like to be as leaders.
Yeah, and to build off of both those insights you provided, something that immediately just grabbed my attention is the origin of the word in the Latin form is it literally just means I. Yeah. It means the person staring at you in so many ways in the mirror every single morning is a version and a result of your ego. And I think that in itself, when I think about my own journey, I'm actually going to be, by the time this episode comes out, I will be probably a few weeks away from turning the big 4-0.
Man, you're so old.
I know, right? I know. Little young Steve compared to my co-host here. But I think what it makes me think immediately is I can't help but sort of reflect on the last 10 years and think of the 30-year-old Steve versus the 40-year-old Steve. And the 30-year-old Steve's level of self-awareness was piss poor, to say the least. I mean, it was just, and there was and this is where you were going with your insights.
That's a British term for American.
Sorry, yes. But you just bring it out of me, mate, when we're doing this. But I think what's so important is that, to your point, Lee, like, are we willing just to simply accept that there are both unconscious and conscious powers happening all at once when it comes to ourselves? And the moment we can just find a level of acceptance with that, I think it sparks the curiosity, doesn't it? Immediately you just go, well, what am I not seeing? What am I not aware of? Because there's a few things that if I start thinking about it, like, yeah, I have a little bit of pride around that, and yeah, I have a little bit of bravado around that, and yeah, I get a little bit butthurt when someone says that in front of me and all this kind of thing. So I'm aware of those parts. But what are all these other parts that I'm not seeing that make me, especially when I think about my role as a founder and as a leader? And like I say, when I look back on that 30-year-old Steve versus 40, there are things that 30-year-old Steve, had he been told them, he would have dismissed them. He would have probably attacked as opposed to listened. And now when I think about it, the way I've kind of trained myself around my ego is to immediately step into curiosity and think, okay, if I'm hearing it from the perspective of an individual about me, there's a perception that has occurred that I can learn about right now. And does that mean that this individual's right? Not necessarily. Could it mean that there's just been a huge breakdown in communication? Absolutely. But at the same time, I think the moment we acknowledge that the ego is just, it's me, myself, and I to begin with, and if we're aware of that and we understand the unconscious and conscious powers at bay when this is happening, then we can step into curiosity, right?
I think curiosity is almost always the answer. It's such a good way to stop yourself from getting defensive. If you take a step back and go, I wonder why, or what is this really about? There was so much that came up for me as you're speaking. It's such a curious world that we live in, that we have these thoughts about ourselves, and then we have this impact. So how do we move through the world? What is the way that we affect other people? Mm-hmm. And how other people view us is also not necessarily how we view ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the gifts that I really like to give people when we work together, what I hope for people when we work together, is that you are able to see your stuff, how you move through the world, take ownership for how you behave, your ego, how you show up, your impact, and be able to let go of other people's projections on you. And to do that, you have to have this elevated level of self-awareness. Typically, and I'm curious if this is what you experience, Steve, when I'm working with somebody, they'll bring me in and they'll say, right, we've got this culture problem, or, hey, I know I'm getting in the way of the business growing and I need to learn more leadership skills, or I need to learn this. And the first few conversations will be, but this person needs to do this, and that person needs to do this, and this person needs to do that. And I stop them and I'm saying, well, let's discover who you are first, because we can't change your relationships with other people until you understand who you are, how you show up, the stuff that you are taking through the world from your childhood, from your genetic personality traits to your learnt behavior skills. And then what Carl Jung would call the shadow, which is these parts of ourselves that we're not fully comfortable with, we don't like, and we ignore. And it's called the shadow because it's kind of behind you. It's this bit of you that you don't like, and it sits behind you and you don't acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. And we have to acknowledge it because it's part of us. Yeah. You know, part of my shadow is I have an insecurity about my intelligence. So dyslexic and autistic when I was young at school, only very recently diagnosed with both of those things, so didn't know that I move through the world differently than my peers because of the structure of my brain and the way that my brain works. So I got the message, you're really bright and you're lazy. And I kind of absorbed that message as, I've got to keep proving to people that I'm smart. Yeah. And that has an impact. You know, adults don't like other adults that try to be smarter than them the whole time. Yep. And the journey for me has been realizing that. And the more I go, I don't have the answer. The more I go, let me think about that more. Or the more I go, let's explore that together, rather than just giving my immediate, not thought out, pithy answer. The more people trust me and the more people think I'm smart. Right. And it's opposite of what you expect. I don't have to prove I'm smart. People just know it when I'm comfortable with it. And I think this is the crux here, is getting comfortable with who you are, understanding who you are, and owning who you are. Mm-hmm. And for me, until you can get to that, like you said, Steve, the Steve of 10 years ago didn't know who he was. Typically, then you become more defensive because stuff feels more threatening to you, to your identity, to your ego. And once we can own it, and this is who I am, this is how I show up, these are the things that trigger me, these are the things that I struggle with, it's much easier to have those relationships with people and not get triggered by them and be able to control ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, and in your initial question around just like if I'm exposed to those sort of things in the work that I do, I actually really appreciate the way you create that cycle of that order, if you will, of know the self, understand the self, and then own the self. And I think a lot of the time you were using this insight as well around proving, you're using it from your own standpoint of proving whether or not you were smart enough. But I think that need to prove who is right and who is wrong comes out immediately when folks like you and I start our work with organizations. It's almost as though the leader acknowledging that they're going to invest in coaching is enough of them acknowledging that they're saying, "Hey, I'm owning, right? I'm owning by investing in this, right?" But let me just tell you that the problems are over there. They're not here. But by me investing in this,
Can you fix my team? Sure.
Right,
but
right.
We might need to do some work on you too.
Right. What if is there a world where you, the individual, can improve? And I think any worthy leader is going to always accept and acknowledge that. It's like, okay, well, if you can improve before we start even pointing any form of direction and perspective towards things outside of you, let's maybe just better understand yourself. Let's maybe understand, is the problem that you're encountering with your team as great as it is, or is it something about the circumstances that you're operating in that you're not receiving well? And maybe that's something within you that we can work through. And I have an example with a few emerging leaders that I'm working with right now is they acknowledged to me in the first quarter of our work that their emotions typically reign when they're in these larger group settings and they don't like what they're hearing. And once those emotions really do overcome them, it's near impossible for them to show up as an effective leader. And so the work that we're doing right now is around better understanding the origin of those emotions, better understanding the cause of those emotions in those certain situations, so that when they arise, we can have a couple of more useful techniques to let them just maybe calm before they then step into any form of leadership action. And over time, that gap between the emotional response and the way they show up, that's going to improve. And we're going to talk about that in future episodes. But for me, I think that order, as you put it here, the knowing the self, the understanding the self, and then the owning the self too quickly, a lot of the time, I think a leader wants you to come in, let's say for us as a coach, and help somehow establish where ownership needs to be applied in terms of where the problem is, when really we just need to say, hey, listen, I'm going to accept and assume that there are problems and things that we can improve here, but can we just know and then understand what's going on first, and know and better understand ourselves before we try to start to navigate wherever ownership needs to be taken.
Yeah. And, before we started, and what we do, dear friends and listeners, is we chat about what we want to talk about today. We have a program of episodes and we pick which one we want to do and we establish what we're talking about. And one of the genesis for what we want to talk about today was the difference between elite sport and the kind of corporate environment and the startup environment we see. And one of the things is around ego. There's obviously big egos in elite sport, and there's also in the best performing teams and athletes this relentlessness for how can I be better. Mm-hmm. And as Steve was talking, I was kind of thinking about how does that play out and why is it subtly different in the corporate world to the sports world? And I think because in the sports world, it's typically easily measurable. So you know exactly where you stand in the pecking order, and you know exactly where you stand compared to where you want to be. So, we can measure everything. Take my sport, track sprint cycling, we can measure how fast you can do a distance in, and we can measure how much power you can output, and we can play with those things, and we can improve your power, and you will go faster. And in the corporate world, it's about perception, typically, not so much measurable. I mean, it's measurable in things like sales, but a lot of it is perception, the perception of how am I as a leader.
Just to be clear, he's saying measurable, not miserable. Like, yeah, I know the accent. It's very, there's a few people listening to this. It's like, is he saying miserable?
Thank you for the translation.
Measurable. He's saying measurable.
Yes. I can't even say it now. You've broken me. Quantifiable. How's that, Steve?
There you go.
It's quantifiable. And often in the corporate world, it's less quantifiable. Like leadership is less quantifiable. And especially in startups, when you're playing around with a lot of stuff, a lot of it is quantifiable, but not all of it. Mm-hmm. So then I think that actually tweaks our ego more, because we've got to be, how am I perceived by other people? And that's so important. And also, I've been bestowed with this title of leader. A lot of my clients are a little bit younger in their leadership journey, very, very smart, brilliant people, created something that's doing really well, typically, multi-millions to the hundreds of millions turnover for their business, yet may not have actually been a leader for that long. Because they started the company, they're doing all the jobs, and then suddenly they've got other people coming in and they've got to go, oh, what do I do with that? So I think it's interesting to apply that sports model of the relentless pursuit of how do we do things better? And we've spoken about it before, and you can check back in our previous episode. We talked about the Kaizen principle of improving everything you do by a little bit, and the accumulation of that, the aggregation of marginal gains is that the output is much better. I think now I want to focus on that sports mentality of we can improve everything, and how I want us to think about it in a business setting is ourselves. What do we do to improve ourselves? And Steve talked about what I'll call emotional regulation, which is your ability to feel something in a situation. Our fight, flight, freeze, fawn system is triggered. An emotion comes with that: fear, anger, sadness, joy. And then we have to decide how we want to behave if we're going to be an elevated leader, rather than just falling into our typical patterns and reactions. And we'll get into that in the next episode. Right now, I want us to focus on, are we aware of how our ego is showing up? Are we aware of what our ego means? And if Steve's going to indulge me for a second, I'm just going to share a little bit about me and my ego and how I show up. So my genetic personality traits, and this is the work that I did with my coaches, I do this with my clients, are brilliance, play, vision, connection, and presence. So part of my being is being smart, and this is why it's so closely tied to how I think people see me and how I'm concerned about people see me and how I want to show up. And then from that, I have this shadow that we talked about of tyrannical Einstein. And that means that when I feel out of control, I use my intelligence to control everything around me. So I become very controlling. Now, I know that now. As a younger man, I didn't know that. And that impacted all of my relationships because nobody likes to be controlled. And it allowed me to step into leadership positions with ease because I felt comfortable in control, yet I would misuse that control, and it had a negative impact. I'm kind of curious how that lands with you, Steve, and what's your experience of your own self?
Yeah, so much of your backstory around intelligence, education resonates massively with me. We've had that in common since we've known each other. And what's funny is I've gotten to a point now where and this is the kind of the other side of ego, right? I can spend an hour in a room. I can do a keynote. I can do a keynote very effectively and successfully, and people can come up to me and give me all this feedback, and I'll dismiss any sort of insight towards being educated or having impact as saying like, it's just my accent. I just sound way smarter than I actually am. and immediately it's like deflate, like immediately like push it away. There's no way I could possibly be the intelligent guy in the room. That's not possible because I've had this upbringing where I've been told that's not the case. And that's the other side, right? That's the other side of the ego. And so the ego is at play when it comes to me showing up and stepping into my brilliance and being able to, very much get to the vision of what it is I'm trying to provide to, say, an audience in that moment. And especially even in my world of coaching now, I came, as we're recording this, I had a day yesterday where I had 4 coaching sessions in about 6 hours. And what I love about those is that you just get into a flow state as a coach. You become so present and just so immersed in what you're doing that your clients are the beneficiary, and they tell you that at the end, like, oh my, this was great today, and this was just amazing. And then again, it's like, no, you're doing the work. It's all you. But if I'm gonna actually own it, and I kind of came home and I tried to do that with my wife yesterday. I was like, I had a freaking great day of coaching today. I mean, I was on. I crushed it, and I try to acknowledge that kind of thing from time to time. But I think that's the fine balance in a lot of what we're talking about here is you want to step into your brilliance. You want to have an awareness of self to where you're stepping into a vision of what it is you're trying to be. But at the same time, it's just like, as the leader for an organization, as we're talking to you right now, you, the leader, how well are you kind of walking that line? We referenced that book, 15 Conscious Levels of Leadership. Maybe I got the title wrong. I'm not sure. I think I got it right.
15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
Commitments of Conscious Leadership. Like, that's a beautiful example of what we're talking about here is being above and below the line, the conscious and the unconscious. It's like, that is really what we get into the heart to here is, are you able to step into your qualities, your brilliance, and do it in a way where it doesn't become the focus in the room, and you're serving the room because of your brilliance as opposed to being the focus because of your brilliance.
I love that framing. And what I was thinking about as you're talking, Steve, is authenticity. And human beings are naturally very good at knowing when somebody's being authentic or not. So, when you're stepping into your zone of genius, let's call it that, and you're owning it and you're authentic, people will resonate with it strongly. And when you're faking it, when you're pretending to know something that you don't know, or you're uncomfortable with it, people will also hear that typically and have a response to that. And I was working with an athlete, worked with him from a young age to an international, and then I moved countries. He moved to different coaches, ended up getting a medal at the Olympics, and we've stayed in touch. We're great friends, and we were chatting, and he said, "I've got to let you know you were the best coach I've ever had." And I was very flattered by that, but also kind of taken back as like, "Hey, you went on and you had this great success after me. What do you mean?" And he said, "You're the only coach I ever worked with who could say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Let's go and explore it together. Or why don't you go and explore it and come back and educate me?" And he said in his experience, he had other coaches who would have to answer whatever the question was. And he would know that it was inauthentic. He would know that they didn't know. And he would know that that was about them and their ego instead of being in service of him. And there's a huge amount of power, I think, and this is how I think of leadership. Leadership is an act of service. We're in service of the people that we're leading. We're in service of the service and product we're selling, the company we're working for. We are in service. That's the leadership that I believe in. And having that confidence to say, I don't know the answer here, it gets you so much more trust. And my ego before, as a younger man, was I would have to have that answer because I felt that if I didn't, I wasn't smart enough. And now I know that it's nothing to do with whether I have all the answers or not, is nothing to do with my ability to be able to understand things, which is really what intelligence is. Right? How can I understand things? My capacity to understand things. And being able to say, I don't understand that yet. Let's go and explore it. I'll go and find it out. Or let's go and find somebody who's an expert in that can teach us. That's my favorite thing in the world to do now. If I don't know something, I like to find somebody who's an expert and say, teach me about this. I'm curious. And I think the leaders I say that really take this on are by far the most impactful. And one of the things I love about coaching is watching leaders shed that inflated ego and then step into what you're talking about, which is this authenticity and this power of, I'm going to own it. And there's this weird dichotomy of, I want to be seen as smart. Yeah, I actually also, when somebody says to me, oh, that was really smart. Or, oh, I really love the way that you did that. And you're like, oh, I don't know. And you have, like being comfortable owning it. Because nobody likes false modesty either. Again, that's inauthentic when somebody's giving you that compliment and you're like brushing them off. And I used to do this in sport. I'd win something, which to me was a stepping stone event. And somebody would say, oh, that was a great race you did there, or a wonderful performance. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's not a big deal. Minimizing the people standing next to me at that moment on the podium who've just got second and third. And for them, it's a big deal. And I'm like, this is nothing. And I think there's a lot of power in being able to accept compliments and appreciation and acknowledgement with generosity for yourself and for the person giving it to you.
I think what we're really highlighting here, because there was, just to really let you in here as a listener, there was two things. I asked Lee before we got started, I said, like, how can we assess what we're trying to achieve in this episode? And Leader said, like, what ego is and how it affects leadership. Really, just that 1-2 punch. And I think what we're really revealing here is just the complexity. It's the complexity of ego. Like, you're hearing both sides of the discussion, and I'm sure the people listening to this and be like, well, which one is it, guys? Which one is it? You know, am I supposed to be modest? Am I supposed to be confident? Am I supposed to be this? Am I supposed to be that? And it's like, that goes right back to where we started with this episode. It's getting comfortable with yourself. It's learning about yourself. It's having that curiosity to understand how I show up in certain situations versus ways that I maybe avoid showing up in other ways. And, you know, going even further, not to make this a therapy / sort of psychological episode for both of us in our childhoods, but at the same time, like, because
that's what we're here for, Steve, is to share our stuff.
Right. From an education standpoint, where I was dismissed, I made up for with humor. I wanted to be, I'm the funny guy in the room then. That's what I'm going to be. And I'm going to, you know, all eyes on me. I'm going to crack a joke and all this kind of stuff. And I kept that. I've probably kept elements of that going to this day as I approach my 40th birthday. It's like, okay, like, whenever Steve tries to be funny, he's not. And whenever Steve just tries to be himself, he is. And it's like, well, why are we still trying to force this square peg of humor at times into a circular hole where it's not required? You know,
Yeah.
and that's part of the awareness. Like, I get to say that now on a public platform like this because I've done the work around it and I'm incredibly aware of it, you know, and that is what I hope. And when we talk about how this affects leadership and the awareness of ego, that's the beauty of it, is that you and I, Lee, we are in positions of leadership with the clients that we work with to use. Like, I'd love for you to go back and repeat your definition for what leadership is, because I think the way you phrase it, it immediately shows the opportunities that we have in our lives to be a leader. We don't need the title. I'm a high performance executive coach, as are you. Neither of us necessarily have to say, we're a leader. We don't have to say that. We show up in the space that we're in, knowing that we have responsibilities to influence the people that we're working with. And therefore, we owe it to them to do some work around our ego and to know, like, hey, when's a good time for me to say, you know what? Very rarely do I make this about me, but this actually is a great time to make this about me. You know, all the coaching literature says it's about the client, it's about the client, it's about the client. It's like, well, occasionally creating an active relatability with a client is the best thing you can do as a coach. And you need to get just aware enough of, like, hey, now's a great time for me to tell them how this has happened to me before, how I've come out of it, and how I've in fact conquered the very situation that they're currently working through. And some coaches are scared to do that because it's like, well, that goes against the coaching model. It's just like, well, bollocks to that. Another English phrase for the day. You know, it's just about how can we just say, this is what the person needs in this moment, and I have a level of self-awareness to where I can do that strategically.
Yeah. I see this come up a lot in my men's groups, where some of the most powerful stuff that happens is when men just share their own experiences and other men go, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that feels like that. And that's how I like to use that in coaching is, here's some of my journey so that you can understand I'm not this perfect person sitting here in front of you that life has been easy for, that had it figured out when I was 14 years old. Like, there's been a big journey to end up to the person that you see sitting here in front of you. Mm-hmm. And you're going to go on that journey too. You know, I was on a podcast yesterday, men's therapist, wonderful guy. And what we were kind of talking about is how men show up and how men believe that they should show up. You know, when a lot of the people listening to this are going to be men disproportionately show up in leadership positions. And he was saying, but what about the men that aren't leaders that are going to be listening to this podcast? And my belief is everyone is a leader. You're a leader of yourself. You're a leader in your family. You're a leader in, this is men and women, you're a leader in how you show up in all of your friendships. Like, you're leading all the time. So this, what we're talking about here, whether you're a founder or not, I think is super relevant to everyone. Mm-hmm. And my belief in the world is you cannot be a great leader without self-understanding. Because if you don't understand how you show up in relationships with other people and yourself, you know, how do you show up in relationship with yourself? How do you understand yourself? How do you relate to your own intelligence, to your own ability to do things, to what triggers you, what doesn't trigger you? If you don't understand that stuff, you can't show up authentically. And that's the stuff that people really resonate with. People resonate with people that show up as themselves, not who are trying to show up out of congruence with themselves. Because we all spot that immediately. Like, what's this person doing? Why are they playing a game? Why are they trying to be something they're not? And that generates mistrust. So if you want to generate trust, you've got to get comfortable with you. And that's all of you. You know, that's my tyrannical Einstein. That's the part of me that wants to control people to feel safe, right? That's this is where I'm going with this. This is your humor. Humor is an incredible defense mechanism. Many bullied people, many bullied children develop a humor mechanism. You hear a lot of comics, you hear a lot of comedians, and they will talk about not fitting in, feeling lonely, being bullied. Because what do, right? You go to the gym and you get big as a guy to protect yourself from getting bullied, or you become you become the funniest person in the room, or you become the most driven person, right? I'm just going to succeed more than you. I'm going to be the nerd that goes and succeeds more than you. And it's wonderful to see how our society is kind of encouraging that more, like use your intellect. But these things are what we would call defensive mechanisms. And people understand when you're being defensive, as you said about your humor. You know, we can tell what's from the heart humor. We can tell what's meaningful humor to that deflective humor, which can feel sometimes either a bit more spiteful or a bit self-grandizing. So I just keep coming back to authenticity. Who are you, and do you know who you are? And my experience is actually most people don't know who they are. They have a version of themselves. So I play this game with people when I first start working with them. I get them to go and ask 15 to 20 people, what shows up when I do? What qualities do I bring to a room? They're not allowed to explain it any more than that. They just get people's initial reactions to these questions. And then we get all of these things. And from that, that's how we choose these 5 personality trait words. And every time someone's done it so far, and I've done this hundreds of times, people are surprised at how other people see them. Because they have a version of themselves, their ego that they've built up in their mind, that doesn't typically quite fit how other people see them, or that they can't quite step into. They're like afraid of, oh, you're this wonderful, loving guy. Oh, that feels a little bit uncomfortable. Or you're really, you're really smart, or you're really funny, or you're really empathetic, and oh, that feels a little bit uncomfortable. And when people hear it from other people, can start absorbing it and start stepping into it, there's just an ease that you start to walk through the world with. I've always had this dance with my intelligence. Am I intelligent? Am I not intelligent? I think I'm intelligent, but I've got to prove it to make sure that other people know it. Yet other people immediately tell me that they think I'm really smart. Like, what is going on? And as soon as I could just let go of that dance, it all takes care of itself.
Yeah, it really does. And what we've both done is we've married up, and we've married women that are both massively more educated than we are, so that we can step into trying to be more educated, but at the same time know that we will never be able to get to that level. So it's probably very unhealthy the more you think about it in terms of what we talked about here today.
And I see education differently now. I think I would profess that I probably read more than most people. And what is education? Education is, for me, it's being curious, and it's having a desire to understand, and then finding people that can teach you. And because of my dyslexia, the typical teaching model doesn't work. I have to have conversations with people. So I go find people that are smarter on subjects than me, and I get them to explain it to me. That's my way of gaining education. We're at our Steve imposed time limit here, so we're going to have to wrap up.
Well, yeah, and one way I want to really just bring this whole episode to a close is that something that's just really organically come out of this is we've defined a path, we've outlined a path towards authenticity, which I love. It's like go into the space of being curious around knowing, understanding, and eventually owning your ego as a way to pursue mastering authenticity. Like what a wonderful way to present this. Because for me, I've never thought of it like that until we had a chat about it. And I think so for me, I've learned that today. And to be able to say, oh, wow, so there's the payoff. The payoff is for me to know myself so well that I can show up in any room, step into my truest self, and know that I'm good with that. I'm comfortable in that skin. And to your point, how ego, like one of the things we wanted to achieve is how ego can affect leadership. Boom, right there. Like if you do the work around ego, you have an opportunity as a leader to become the most authentic version of yourself. And I assure you, the best way to start mastering leadership is to step into your authentic self. Once you get there, just about anything is possible as a leader. And I think if that's what you needed to hear today out of this 35 minutes, I think that's a result as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, one last thing I want to leave everybody with is we all want to be loved, appreciated, and valued. Like they're the basic human traits. We are collective animals. We're part of a society. We're designed to be that way. So we need to be appreciated, loved, noticed. And when we try to get that, I think often it backfires because we behave incongruently to get that. When we step into our authenticity and just know that people will appreciate us, love us, acknowledge us, and notice us, then it happens. And we all know it, right? Those people that are trying too hard, and we've felt it so many times, like at a party or something. I'm trying to show off and it feels awkward and other people can feel it. My mum said to me when I was really young, Lee, you don't need to try so hard. People just love you. The more I've lent into that, it took me 30 years to understand what the hell she was saying, but the more I've lent into that, the more it's been true and people just love me. And I just accept that people will love me.
Well, I love you, mate. I love you.
Aww.
And I think what a wonderful hug. What a wonderful virtual hug to finish that on. I think we take a lot from this, and what I love about it, it's one of those episodes where we started on a concept and we've landed on something that neither you or I necessarily intentionally wanted to make this episode about, and that those are the best conversations, and for me that's what makes this whole process with you just so fun, just to be able to go through that together, and the listeners to be the beneficiaries of all that. So tune in next time for some emotional regulation. I have no doubt that Lee and I will continue to reveal more about our troubled childhoods and troubled pasts, but until then, we wish you well. Leaders, go and lead and step into your authenticity and know that it starts by better understanding your ego. And until next time, Lee, pleasure.